Across the globe, ancient cultures have long used plant-based medicines to heal mind, body, and spirit. Today, modern science is rediscovering what those traditions have known for centuries, that the path to wholeness sometimes begins with expanding consciousness itself. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age. Our guest is Dr. Tracy Kim Townsend, a UVA, Harbor-UCLA, and Harvard-trained physician who has dedicated her career to preventative health and human vitality. Her work focuses on unlocking what she calls full-spectrum vitality, the feeling of being fully alive and deeply human. In Oregon, where psilocybin has received legal recognition under state law and FDA breakthrough therapy status, Dr. Townsend helps individuals explore the therapeutic potential of psychedelics in safe, structured, and ethical guided ways. Today, we'll explore how psychedelics like psilocybin are being used in therapy and trauma treatment, how legalization and regulation are unfolding, and how modern medicine can respect and learn from ancient traditions as we reconsider what it truly means to heal and to age well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health. Well, Dr. Townsend, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. Let's have you tell us about yourself and how you made the leap from traditional Western medicine, I believe it was orthopedic surgery, correct?
Yes.
To psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Well, yes, it does seem like quite the 90-degree turn. How do you go from orthopedic surgeon? I practiced, I specialized in pediatric orthopedic surgery. And I say that the golden thread is really I've been very interested in powerful transformations that are immediate and enduring. And in a lot of ways, that is what surgery can be for people. But then I came across psychedelic medicines when I was already in my surgery training. So I had made that commitment and I started experiencing my own profound healing with these medicines when used intentionally and therapeutically. And this timing coincided with when the FDA gave breakthrough therapy status to psilocybin, which allowed the explosion of research into psilocybin specifically to unfold via institutions like Johns Hopkins and NYU and Imperial College of London. And now every major medical institution has their own center for psychedelic science research. And so along my own path as I developed myself as a surgeon first, but really at base a physician and archetypally like a healer, I just felt called to serve with these medicines instead of surgery and pharmaceuticals, like the traditional, conventional Western allopathic way of practicing medicine. And as soon as the legal pathway opened up with Oregon passing Measure 109 in 2020, that coincided with my final year of fellowship training when I was in Boston at Harvard. I took a job here in Portland, thinking, okay, I'll continue to practice, orthopedic surgery. I spent so long honing these skills. There's still a part of me that's still very passionate about musculoskeletal health and the role that it plays in longevity and aging well, and just our mental health as well, just health in general. But I enrolled in psilocybin facilitator training, and then I chose to take the leap from my original career path onto this new one a couple years ago, as soon as we were allowed to be operational in 2023 here in Oregon. So I have not looked back since then. I love what I do. I still take all of the skills that I developed, in my path of becoming a physician and use them in my practice today. But if you had told me when I entered medical school that I would be where I am today, I would have never believed. I didn't even know, anything really much about psychedelics at that time. But it's a really exciting time to be practicing medicine. And I'm very optimistic about, cautiously so. There's a lot that we need to tread carefully with how potent these medicines are. But I'm very optimistic about the new paradigm of healing that we're bringing forth today.
I'm excited to talk about this because we have had a few episodes of this podcast where we have kind of dipped our toes a little bit into understanding psychedelic-assisted therapy. You're the expert. I want to dive into a lot deeper today. But kind of before we begin, let's kind of begin with the basics. When we say psychedelics, what range of substances are we actually referring to, and how do they differ in their effects or therapeutic applications?
That's a great question. So psychedelics, in terms of the classical psychedelics, are LSD, psilocybin, DMT, mescaline, and peyote. These are the common denominator for all of them is that they work primarily through the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. They're serotonergic medicines. And they all seem to, the mechanisms are all still very much, we're elucidating as we go. But they seem to work primarily by shutting down the default mode network, which is the network in our brain that's responsible for our inner narrator and our ego identity. Is the default way that we move through our days, that state of consciousness. So they temporarily shut down that network and allow all of the other neural networks that normally don't get much blood flow and electrical activity to come online. And then afterwards, there seems to be this extended period of increased neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself. The word psychedelic is actually a neologism that was coined by Humphrey Osmond, and the etymology is psyche, the Greek word psyche, which translates to soul or mind, and delos or delic. It translates to revealing or manifesting. And so these medicines are felt to be soul or mind revealing or manifesting. And there are so many phenomenological qualities to the actual psychedelic experience that seem to be shared amongst the various psychedelics, these more mystical qualities that are such as self-transcendence or a feeling of unity, a collapsing of the duality that we experience in everyday life. And so they're really special and seem to have a lot of historical use across cultures, across times, for various purposes, whether for healing or divination or various other intentions. And then I would say the other thing that they tend to have in common is that they don't abide by the same pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics as say pharmaceuticals, where it's not weight-based dosing. The experience seems to be powerfully influenced by one's mindset going into the experience, one's intentions before taking the substance, and then also the environment that one is in. So the experience of the psychedelic journey is massively influenced by all of these things, which is not the case with many other, pharmaceutical medications. We're now, there was initial interest in their therapeutic use, earlier last century, in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And then of course there's the famous, shutting down of everything with the war on drugs in the early 70s. And so that effectively, that made all of psychedelics Schedule 1, meaning they had no therapeutic benefit or medicinal benefit, and it stopped all research with these substances until it started opening up again in the 90s and, of course, in the 2000s.
Yeah, we're going to get into a lot of this because there's so many different prongs that we need to explore as we look at, psilocybin-assisted therapy and just as used, even recreationally as well as therapeutically. I want to talk a lot about that. But you use the term full spectrum vitality. How does psilocybin or other psychedelics support that state of being fully alive and fully human?
Yes, yes. And I think that this is the thing that actually most people are seeking without even being consciously aware of it, is full spectrum vitality that is just the quality of what it is to be a fully conscious and sentient human being on planet Earth, with this conscious experience that is available to us in our particular, through this physical vessel. And there are many different ways that psychedelics help us to access this full spectrum vitality. One way that they do is by first helping us to let go of whatever conditioning or patterns of thoughts and behaviors that we oftentimes inherit through the families that we're born into, the cultures that we're born into, that block us off from that experience of full vitality. So many of us learn implicitly along the way that certain feelings are not safe to feel or certain expressions are not safe to have. And so there's all these self-limiting beliefs that we accumulate in life along the way. And what psychedelics do by, shutting down those default networks that that are so ingrained in us that I liken it to software programs that we run on the computer. If that's the software and our physical body is the hardware, just these outdated programs that we're not even consciously aware of. By shutting them down temporarily, we get to trigger or give the opportunity to trigger particular cascades of insight that are informed by our subconscious and even unconscious awareness that help us to question some of those things and not take them for granted and give us access to, I say, more conscious, co-creative control for constructing our reality. Again, when used intentionally, that's one way. Another way is through ego death or ego dissolution. I think that by so many of us, it's actually, without realizing it, there is a lot of existential anxiety. And there's also just the fear of death, and also we're in a death-denying culture. And actually, by embracing the death experience, but psychologically, there is a level of liberation on the other side of that experience that is just really hard to describe. But it's almost like anytime you experience the thing that you fear the most and you survive it, then it's no longer running the show in the shadows. You're no longer captive to it. And so there was actually an inscription in ancient Greece in Mount Athos, which is supposedly one of the sites of these ancient rites, potentially with a psychedelic brew, that were part of this annual rites of passage that gave rise to Greek civilization as we know it. But the inscription at Mount Athos says, "If you die before you die, then you never die." And to me, the way that I interpret that is that if you were to have these ego death experiences via psychedelics, which they are known to catalyze somewhat reliably if you take a high enough dose, then you go through that experience, and then it's like being reborn again, and there's an access to a level of vitality that you just don't take for granted after having an experience like that.
Now, it's interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought about going down this path, but as I'm listening to your language, I'm hearing a lot of Christian language in there, the early biblical language. And I know, there's people say, well, it's a sin to be doing these drugs, or, you have others that'll say, there's a good likelihood that, much of what they talk about in the Bible is stuff that was done under the influence of psychedelics at the time. And I don't know why I was going to go down that way. I don't need to kind of open up that whole gate. But I was also thinking, as you used the kind of the computer analogy, would you say it's more like just kind of as we reboot the computer? A lot of times things are running slow. We turn it off, turn it back on, and it seems to run. Or is it more like that cleaning our cache files out so that, we're getting rid of all this extra junk that just is slowing down our ability to process?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like the metaphor applies in both cases, where there is the rebooting effect. And Robin Carhart Harris, who's one of the leading researchers, psychedelic science researchers at UCSF, has likened it to getting access to default factory settings again. And so, we accumulate all of this conditioning and thought patterns and ways of being over the course of our lives. And a lot of times, especially if it's in response to an adverse childhood experience or another traumatic experience over the course of life, which that is the nature of life, are these tragic experiences. Well, they can leave an outsized imprint on us that through our self-protective coping mechanisms, which are part of our healthy defenses, but they can go from adaptive to maladaptive. It gets really hard to shake that sometimes. And so it helps to just shut everything down and reboot. And but then also in the psychedelic journey itself, there is a lot of that cleaning out those old the memory of sorts. And so there can be a lot of emotional processing of emotional debt. There is a lot of cathartic completions of certain loops or memories, or we revisit certain memories to integrate the pain from those experiences that we haven't fully integrated. Just briefly in the pre-show, you brought up an example of a woman who went through a traumatic experience and a piece of her fragmented off in that way, which is part of our protective coping mechanism while she was very young. And with psychedelics, she was able to, through a journey, retrieve that part of herself that had been fragmented off. And so we have language for this that is squarely psychotherapeutic and that sort of thing. But there's also, if you were to talk to an energy healer or something, or more of a spiritual, take a more spiritual angle, we call it soul retrieval. But it's that coming, healing. The etymology of the word to heal means to come into wholeness again. And so, it used to be, you bring up my language sounding very Christian. If you look at the roots of all major religions, there, this idea of, you can see it is fascinating and makes it, we can certainly start to make conjectures about the roots of, modern day religions being mystical in nature, and who knows what medicinal potions people were drinking then, and writing these stories and coming up with these shared myths. But yes, it is. I would say coherent with specifically the Christian faith in terms of these concepts of the suffering and the dying and the rebirth process. And there's a very rich community of people who come from the Christian faith, still ascribe to the Christian faith, and are exploring psychedelics as well. It is not in conflict with that at all, with the belief system. And I think that's the beautiful part about these medicines too, is they're actually they work very well with various belief systems. And so there's no reason why you couldn't incorporate it. And many of my clients come from the Christian faith or the Mormon faith. We have people who grew up with an Islamic background, obviously Judeo-Christian backgrounds. To me, the really inspiring thing about this medicine is that all people seem to be called to it.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. Yeah, I'm just fascinated with it. We'll get into some of these other tangential kind of ideas and questions that I have, but kind of getting on that kind of starting point and kind of educating our viewers and listeners about really what's happening when they would partake in the ancestral medicines. From a physiological standpoint, what's happening in the brain and body when somebody undergoes a psychedelic experience, particularly regarding trauma, depression, and anxiety? And I think we can also talk in regards to somebody who maybe hasn't experienced big T trauma in their life and they undergo a psychedelic experience. It might be a little bit different.
So, yeah, well, I would say that the people who seem most called to our work right now is, call it legal psilocybin facilitation, are people who at base just feel stuck with whatever they're dealing with. Sure, it can manifest as symptoms of depression, like lack of motivation, lack of optimism, lack of hope, fatigue, chronic fatigue, and lack of energy. It can manifest as anxiety, where whether it's ruminating about the past or projecting, negative projections into the future, or burnout, relationship issues. However it manifests, it's at root, though. I would say that what the common factor for everybody is that I'm looking to get unstuck. I've tried, and ideally you've tried other modalities of unstucking yourself, whether it's, you're tending to your basic self-care, ideally, so, okay, I'm trying movement. I've done meditation. I've done tons of talk therapy. If you have capital T trauma, I would for sure say unpacking some stuff through with, whether it's with a counselor or a therapist or a group or something like that, is going to be the healthy first step, and not looking to psychedelics to be some silver bullet for you. But then usually people reach some plateau there in their healing process there. And that's where psychedelics can catalyze that next level of healing into, first and foremost, acceptance for what has happened in the past, so that you no longer ruminate about it anymore. There's a deep, deep acceptance when you get to process the experiences in those states of consciousness, so that's that concept of releasing or letting go. You're finally you're in full acceptance of it. And then the same goes for, I think, for chronic little T trauma, that tends to manifest as just chronic nervous system dysregulation. And so really what people are looking to, their path of healing is really just learning how to master their nervous system. So you have increased capacity for stressors, the normal stressors of life, and you don't crumble, and increased emotional fluidity, and also just increased emotional intelligence. So much of what people are moving through is just pathologizing normal human emotions. And that's that concept again of really embracing full spectrum vitality, what it means to be human. But the way there's multiple sort of ways that psychedelics help us in the healing of various mental health conditions, or capital T trauma, little T trauma, there's the therapeutic aspects of the journey itself that I mentioned before, but also the other piece is grief processing. That's a really big piece for a lot of people. Again, because there's a lack of safety for feeling emotions and feeling certain feelings, people are actually not able to move through the grief process in the way that we're wired to actually move through it. If you look at other cultures, there's practices like extensive grief rituals around losing a child or losing a parent or losing your lover. And we've lost a lot of that in modernity. And so part of it is just creating the safe space for somebody to process grief. That's a really big one. So there's a cathartic and somatic processing within the journey itself, that closure, that deep acceptance. And then I think the other piece of it too is when people learn how much of their lives are spent in the past and in the future and not in the present moment. And so really learning how to, once the grip of that inner narrator or inner autobiographer, that self-referential thought neural pathway, once that gets quieted down, it allows for which is a very top-down process, neurologically speaking and psychologically speaking. What psychedelics do is they open up the pathways for what are called bottom-up processing. So that's taking what's happening in our peripheral nervous system and those signals coming up and informing our central nervous system and therefore our experience of reality. And so when the top-down predictive processes are interrupted and stopped temporarily, and there's flexibility afterwards, allowing all of that bottom-up processes to it's like a rebalancing of the systems. And there is a level of novelty that becomes available to us that we were filtering out before. Another way of thinking of psychedelics is that they disrupt the reducing valve of our consciousness. So most, we're getting bombarded all the time with sensory information in our here, now, present moment. But because if it's not immediately if it's not immediately influencing our survival in the moment, we discard the information. And so what psychedelics do is they give us, they reduce or they remove the reducing valve. So now all of a sudden there's all this sensory information coming at us in the experience, which is completely novel. And anything that's novel is going to feel intrinsically pleasurable in our psyche and in our nervous system. But those bottom-up processes, we get more access to them after the experience too. And so I say that's therapeutic in and of itself, to no longer have your mind and your ego, your tiny ego identity, that we get this stuck in this atomized, individuated sense of self, when we get to feel connected again to all the world around us and the magic that is in the here now moment. That will cure you of every malady, really, when you get to awaken to the magnificent beauty that is available. Now, of course, you want to make sure that you're not bypassing your, materialistic needs. But for a large proportion of the population, their material needs are actually met. But they're still ruminating on optimizing all of that stuff, when really you get to let that go and start to develop the other aspects of your intelligence that restore vitality ultimately.
You sound like you're describing my experience. Like I talked about before we started recording, and I shared, listeners and viewers want to go to We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast. They can kind of listen to a bit more deeply my experience that I had with my friend Sandy and Sam. But for me, I went into it all expecting just this profound revelation that, was going to tell me how to fix all the things that I was screwing up in my life. And it was almost like I had an inner voice saying, no, that's not what the experience you're going to get right now. And for me, it just opened up. It was the first thing I noticed was that all the colors around me were just so bright. And we were on this, call it a mountain, but it's really a hill in Colorado, just outside of Colorado Springs. And as I looked down, you could just see the greens and the golds of the grass were just so vibrant. And it was weird because the ground seemed so gray. There was like this bark kind of on the ground. And I thought that was kind of strange. But then as everything wore off, I realized, well, that's really kind of what the color was there. But it just pulled all this vibrancy out. And as we kind of broke out of our period of time where we just let the medicine kind of run its course on us, and we started talking about what we were experiencing, I saw a deer in the distance. And as I was experiencing this, I don't have the best vision. I have contacts they're monovision, so I can see a little bit better close and a little bit better farther away. And between the two of them, I see fairly well. But I could see so far out in the distance with such clarity that I had never seen, even when I think I had 20/20 vision, which was probably years and years ago. But there was this deer, and a doe and her fawn came kind of down the hill from us, and I make eye contact with the doe, and it was just like communicating with this doe about, I don't know what, but it was just, from that distance, normally I would not be able to even see the deer's eyes, but I made this eye contact with the deer, and it was just fascinating. And it was not what I expected, but then it was everything that I needed at the time. And in conversation with people who have gone through those experiences, it seems like nobody has the same experience, and you can take the same medicinal dose 2 times in a row and get a totally different experience. Kind of what's going on there? Is there any science that helps us understand why we can all have such different experiences?
Well, I mean, part of it, this is going back to what I was saying earlier about one's mindset, the setting, and one's intentions are how those are just as much, if not more, influential in the experience than the medicine and the amount that you're taking. Of course, the dose does matter, but I mean, the reason why it's so different from time to time. I mean, you can be in the same location with the same people, right? But if you're doing it a week later, it's a different experience. Well, you're different after having taken the medicine. And so the mind, that's the set piece of it, the mindset. And so your psyche and your brain, your nervous system, all of that is shifted after previous experiences. Your sense making is different. All of that is going to influence your experiences. And psychedelics, when used, intentionally, also seem to have this uncanny ability to unlock the very next step of our personal evolution and learning and serve us the exact thing that you mentioned that I didn't even know I needed, but that was the medicine I needed in that moment, was making that connection with another sentient creature that maybe in your default state of consciousness, you wouldn't even have the visual acuity because to make that level of connection. But then also you're in this, expanded state of consciousness. And so there's material and information that you're able to sense that, like I said, you're not normally sensing when you're moving through with your default state of consciousness. And what I always like to impress upon people is that you're able to, it's not just when the psychedelic is in your system that you gain access to these abilities, but they're neuroplastogens. You're able to, under the influence of the medicine, unlock that ability, but then you can continue to cultivate those abilities after the experience with the neuroplasticity that's available. And so we have this saying, the neurons that fire together wire together. And so, we have anecdotal, evidence where people will microdose psychedelics to improve their vision, and people who say they were previously nearsighted and they're no longer that way after microdosing. And that, to me, there's a very plausible mechanism for that, because you're stoking the neural pathways that are connecting your visual cortex to the rest of your neural pathways. And so is there an ability to rewire the neural connections that give rise to vision? I don't see why not. And there's so many other incredible anecdotes. I mean, Paul Stamets famously shares his anecdote of curing his stutter with psychedelics. I mean, I think there's so much about the mind-body connection that we don't appreciate, and that there's, for people who are experimenting on their own, hopefully our research institutions can catch up to validate some of this. But yeah, I think if you think of them as a form of psychotechnology, that's exactly how they can be used.
I know from what I've read and seen that, a lot of the research from Johns Hopkins, Imperial College of London, and all this tend to suggest that the psychedelics reset the certain neural pathways, and that there's a continuation of that reset. It's not like a one-time experience, but that you actually, like for myself even, I'm sitting here, I'm in front of a window and I can see the leaves, our northwest leaves that are still somewhat on the trees, but the color is still more vibrant to it. It's not near as vibrant as it was in that one Sunday morning, afternoon, but I find that I am much more aware of those surroundings. And that's, I always joke because I said I finally get to see what my wife sees when we go hiking and kayaking, because I'm the type, get there, put the energy into it, get a workout out of it. And she's like, oh, look at the trees, look at the plants, look at the animals, look at the houses. And I'm just like, come on, we got to go. And now it's like, oh, wow, that's what she was seeing. And so I'm just finding myself much more aware of my surroundings without having to microdose or any of that kind of stuff. And so is this, some of this reset, is this aligned with what you were typically seeing within your clinical work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, we have, clinical trial evidence that show that the enduring effects and benefits of 1 to 2 dosing sessions, at least with psilocybin, macrodose sessions. And so there's, that it's that neuroplasticity piece afterwards that for certain people, like if you are very intentional in moving through your integration with cultivating whatever new capabilities you would like to cultivate, then you can unlock continued improvements in your state of being. And we see that. We see not only improvements acutely after the dosing session, and not only those benefits lasting for up to a year or years after that, but continued improvements. I mean, we just don't see that with anything else. And so, eventually you get such flexibility of mind that you through other modalities such as, meditation or breath work or ecstatic dance or anything, you can cultivate these other states of consciousness. Eventually, I have clients who, at first you're interested in these psychedelic journeys and exploring these other states of consciousness more regularly, whether it's every 6 months or a year. But then eventually you get to hang up the phone, as they say, once you get the message. And so you don't really, need to trip as often anymore because you're now permanently shifted.
And so how does that compare then when you hear a lot about microdosing of psilocybin and other psychedelics, and then you hear about people that will do just a few, journeys of magic mushrooms or something like that, and it brings them to a point where kind of where that's their target goal of where they wanted to get with the medicine. What's the difference in those two different approaches between microdosing and more periodic, short-term treatment with the medicines?
Yeah, with microdosing, it's a practice that has really just emerged culturally, and we don't have great studies to really show how effective it is for various intentions. I find it really, really fascinating in terms of, well, sure, could there be benefits in terms of neuroplasticity at the subperceptual, so-called subperceptual microdosing level? Sure, I don't see why not. But I'm afraid sometimes with microdosing that it's a recapitulation of just the old paradigm of I need to take this thing to feel a certain way. And we're actually losing out on the magic that is of psychedelics and, with mushrooms specifically, which is that it's more the critical learning window or state of mind that it opens up, and then use it as a catalyst for your learning and adaptation, so that you don't need to take a substance to have a certain state of consciousness. You can learn to toggle various inputs bottom up and top down in your system so that you actually have much more conscious control over your state of consciousness, and you don't need to rely on something. Microdosing, I'm a big proponent of the idea of using microdosing specifically as a bridge therapy for people. That's where it's just having a very specific intention for the use of microdosing. And so, for people who are looking for an alternative to pharmaceuticals that they have terrible side effects with, it can be, but the tapering process with the withdrawal effects can be brutal for some people. I think that microdosing psychedelics could be a really wonderful bridge to helping people come off of their medications in order to optimize themselves and have them be eligible for psychedelic therapies when they otherwise wouldn't have been. And what little evidence we have for microdosing, there does seem to be some signal for people who are having symptoms that are related to depression and anxiety. There might be some signal there. And then the other, common use case with microdosing is more for just, if it's going from below baseline to average. Some people like to use it, as like an optimizing kind of thing. And so to go above average in terms of mood or creativity or productivity or any of those different things, people report, tremendous benefit with that. I think I'm a big proponent of citizen scientists and making yourself an N of 1 experiment. And given how physiologically safe, especially psilocybin. That's why I like working with it. It is not cardiotoxic or hepatotoxic or it's not going to hurt your kidneys. It literally is neuroregenerative, actually. So if you're going to microdose with anything, I would be a proponent of psilocybin. But I just, I would say, just know your intentions with it. And then the other thing I'll say about microdosing too is that there's some possible theoretical concern about the daily dosing and with respect to another serotonin receptor subtype, the 5-HT2B serotonin receptor, which is highly expressed in our heart valves. And so there, people have brought up the theoretical risk of some sort of valvular disease if one were to microdose chronically. But the counterpoint to that is that, it would have to be at much higher doses when taking it, and very chronic, on the order of years. So if you're taking, much higher than the microdoses for years, which most people are not. So I think it's probably largely a theoretical concern, but it's something I have to mention as a physician. Obviously, the most robust scientific evidence is currently for macrodoses, which are for mushrooms in the 3 to 5 or more gram territory, which corresponds to, in the clinical research, they only use the synthetic psilocybin molecule. So that's 25 milligrams to 35 milligrams of psilocybin analyte. But that can be intimidating for a lot of people, especially, I think if you have, it really boils down to your degree of comfort and the level of safety and trust you have with proceeding further with these things. And so in which case microdosing is much more accessible for people. It doesn't require, melting your mind to have the benefits. And so, my stance on all of it is hey, whatever helps people cultivate relationships with these medicines and serves them so that they can show up as their highest self, I'm a proponent of course, the responsible sourcing and yada, yada, all that stuff.
So a word I keep hearing is intentionality.
Yes.
And so why are we doing what we're doing, and in what environment are we doing it, and with whom are we doing it?
Yes. And I say, recreational use can be an intention, play is a very valid intention, and play and laughter is the best medicine for so many of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, just having that intention, because what psychedelics do, especially when you go into higher dose territory, is that because they're loosening the top-down predictive processes in our brain, they essentially indiscriminately open up the mind. And so if you're not intentional going into the journey, you could easily go astray into territory that's not particularly beneficial for you. And that's the so-called bad trip. And so there are certain safeguards you can take to avoid those pitfalls in a journey. But, plenty of psychonauts have like wandered into that territory, and they live to tell the tale, but is not recommended. And so intention is crucial in terms of being a guidepost for you in the experience. Another thing we say in the psychedelics community is that psychedelics amplify what is there. And so if you're going into the experience with unexamined paranoia or unexamined fears or, just anything that you're not conscious of, it can emerge in the experience. And so hence why there's so much emphasis too placed on, safety measures. So, I always say, know where your medicine comes from, so that's not a paranoid fear that's circulating around in your conscious, subconscious or unconscious awareness. Be with people that you trust and feel safe with. Hopefully somebody is, if you're going into higher dose territory, I'd recommend having somebody who can, not be in that territory and be a little more grounded and watch out for your safety in, 3D world. Just like that's too where the preparation phase, another, besides setting and intention, there's also preparation going into the experience. That's preparing one's physical vessel, your mental state, your emotional state, and I say your psychospiritual state too is very helpful to dial in before going into one of these experiences. And then integration afterwards, because inevitably challenging experiences do arise. You take enough psychedelics, they do come up. I say with proper integration and with proper support, they can become the deepest of healing experiences. But that piece is key too, is to have, proper integration support. So you're, and this means, it can be something as simple as just making sure you're talking with people who've been through similar experiences. I think so many times too, people can try to integrate with professionals who don't have experience with psychedelics, in which case there is harm that can occur from that, because they will pathologize inadvertently what are normal experiences with psychedelics. And so I always say that piece is really key, that you're talking with someone who either has been through the experience themselves and integrated it for the wisdom that it holds themselves, or helps, other people to do that.
So what distinguishes psychedelic-assisted therapy from traditional talk therapy or pharmacological treatments for mental health?
So yes, there is psychedelic-assisted therapy, which is actually not what we practice in Oregon. In Oregon, the legal framework is called adult use. And so it's distinct from therapy. And what we do is basically anybody who wants to use psilocybin and is healthy enough and safe enough to do it, and you're over the age of 21, you can have access to this medicine as long as it's in a licensed service center with a licensed facilitator. Psychedelic-assisted therapy would be similar to what MDMA is going through with their clinical studies, where it is paired with psychotherapy as part of preparation and integration with a psychotherapist. And so, and the way that it complements so much, and actually I've heard another psychedelic scientist, a friend of mine, say perhaps we should call it therapy-assisted psychedelics, to place more of the emphasis on the psychedelic part of the experience. But psychedelics can be used as a psychotherapist would say, like a psycholytic. And so basically, by softening the ego defenses that one has going into a talk therapy encounter. There's that flexibility of mind, that openness that is very hard to have otherwise. And so it can just deepen the rapport that you have with your therapist. And two, it can just give you access to flexibility of mind so that that work with the therapist is more fruitful. A lot of times, the reasons why people will not have great experiences in talk therapy is because you're stuck in your default state of consciousness and you have these really robust defense mechanisms that for a lot of people, they won't even entertain talk therapy because they know that they're just not going to break through that. And it's like playing judo with your therapist, basically, is trying to open you up. But I also think that psychedelics can be used with coaching, and I sometimes refer to our practice as more like a psychedelic-assisted health coaching practice, and we're more like coaches. If therapy is more focused on the understanding your past, coaching is more about more focused on the future. And so for a lot of people, I find that most people have done enough rumination about the past and understanding all the stories that led up. They understand their autobiography really well. At some point, you get to let go of the rigid attachment to your story so that you can start to rewrite a new story for yourself. And so, the past is the past. We come into full acceptance and closure with it. How does it now influence you moving forward? And so, again, you get access to this flexibility of and letting go of your previous self-limiting beliefs, and you get to start to entertain new future potentialities that you just wouldn't have entertained before. I think a prime example of this, and actually in the longevity space, is Brian Johnson. I don't know if you've followed, and he's quite the character, but
yeah.
But one thing I've learned from him, and that's another thing I think psychedelics can help you with, is really looking at every person or animal or anything that happens in your life as a teacher for you, as a way of illuminating aspects of yourself that you wouldn't otherwise get have illuminated. And so for me, Brian Johnson has shown what's possible in terms of completely reinventing yourself. I think a lot of people don't know about his backstory, but he grew up very poor in rural Utah in a strictly Mormon family. And he put all of his emphasis early on in life in making money, making as much money as possible, as that was the pathway to happiness. And he got married young, he became a father young, and he was very stressed out building his startup. And while he was eventually successful with it financially, he went through a 10-year period of severe depression. And he also was very unhealthy, coping with all of that stress in the most unhealthy ways. And he eventually, he climbed out of that deep depression and started exploring, ecstatic dance through raves in Brooklyn warehouses after he, and gradually opening up the realm of possibility of what his future could look like outside of the narrow life path that he had previously held on to and envisioned for himself. And for me, I much rather see a world where people are embracing their authentic self and gaining access to that permission to express themselves exactly however it is that leads to the most vitality for you, because you're going to be of greater service to all of us when you are in your light and feeling expansive and following what truly brings you joy and makes you feel alive. And that's and psychedelics help open up that field of possibility that we were just closed off to before. I mean, I'm a good example of that. I think a lot of physicians are very burned out, and they're not actually living in alignment with their dharma, which was they went into medicine to help people heal and come into wholeness. And then we get we become a cog in the wheel of the healthcare industrial complex with all of its misaligned incentives. And it's like, oh, well, I already chose this path. I guess I'm just stuck in it. And that's not the case. Like, you can actually explore other possibilities. You're never stuck, actually. Like, you can, I say, like, that's why we have so many examples on planet Earth right now of people where you could choose any life path now. It's almost like you have permission to, it's about giving ourselves permission ultimately to follow those dreams.
And you've talked on your podcast quite a bit about your burnout early on in medicine and how the psychedelics kind of help break that burnout and, free you to be able to enjoy really what you were trained to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I say, like, there are 2 times I wanted to quit medicine. Like, right when I was graduating medical school, I was already burned out and disillusioned about it was a process of elimination to find a specialty that I thought would bring me fulfillment. And then when I was halfway through orthopedic surgery residency, I again did not feel aligned. And it was psychedelics that helped me see a path for myself where not only did I learn how to survive residency, but I actually thrived during that period of time in my life that is, traditionally very stressful for people, and people slowly die inside in residency and become a shell of themselves. And that's where full spectrum vitality came to me, which was actually being able to have the capacity to be with that whole experience and not resist aspects of it, but to actually be fully present for the incredible privilege that it was to be in that deep learning. And I see today how it has served me so well to be able to do what I do now. If I had quit after med school or quit in the middle of residency, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now. And so I'm so grateful to these medicines for helping me to find a path, and a path that's in full alignment with I say my highest self, basically the part of me that feels like, oh, this is what I came here on the planet to do.
I know for myself personally, there's been times where I've struggled with kind of that whole idea of purpose. And like, we moved out to Oregon, almost 18 years ago. I guess it was 17 years ago in September. And this is my 18th year teaching at Western Oregon. And there's been so many times I've just been so miserable because I feel like this was the wrong move. And what was the purpose in doing all this? And, you go back and forth struggling with trying to journal and your mindful practices and all those types of things. And it seems to me that the psychedelic medicines can help us to unlock some of those things that we're holding in, locked inside, and kind of free us to be able to explore greater possibilities, get us unstuck from the past and more present where we are, but with direction. Because a lot of times we could say, okay, well, I've learned to be present. All this mindful practices, yoga, meditation, all this stuff gets me in the moment. But sometimes we need to have something that gets us beyond the present into the next step, the next stage of our life. And it sounds like psychedelics are very useful for people that are just feeling stuck or feeling unsatisfied in life.
For sure. Yes. Well, I also say that, beyond there's no bypassing the healing phase with psychedelics, where whatever is unresolved from the past, like, can and will arise again to be integrated. But, and for me, that took years, that, like, I wasn't even aware of it going in and stepping onto this path, but incredible intergenerational trauma. And then we have substance abuse in my family, although I wouldn't say that, I'm like a lot of people where if you were to ask me, like, did you have a traumatic upbringing? I wouldn't say, yes, I did. I would say, no, my family was pretty normal. But then when you look at the adverse childhood experiences, like actual questions, like, oh yeah, that checks out. I did have a member of my family who had substance abuse problems, and yeah, was there chronic, emotional abuse or neglect or what have you, and then my father died traumatically when I was 20 years old, and I had incredible unprocessed grief from that and a lot of guilt. And so it took many journeys and many different iterations for me to come to terms with all of that happened for me, to get to the point where, and one of my greatest teachers, she serves ayahuasca, and she's indigenous on her mother's side. What she has taught me is that that you are healed when you can be profoundly grateful for all of it. And so there's this level of understanding and awareness that we get to eventually come to where you see how it was all in service to your evolution, and not only your own personal evolution, but the way, again, that you serve. And so I'm always talking about this with my clients too, because it's not enough to be focused on oneself, but it's how you show up for the collective. And all of us have this innate desire, whether we're conscious of it or not, of being of service to the planet, to its people, to its animals, to the plants, to all of the sentient other creatures. It's an incredible, this own organism that we get to be a part of. And so you get, it's fascinating how along the way, in parallel with your own personal healing and coming into wholeness, is the development of, you start to get signs and messages about how you take your own healing and make it of service. And that to me is also healing, because that is part of, for all of us to be of value and to be of use and to serve. So that, I think, is a critical part of well-being, is to have that that purpose piece. And when we're not clear on our purpose, how it uniquely manifests with our own unique blueprint, then that's like wonderful. That's going to manifest for you as feeling lost in that way. Can psychedelics help you with that? Absolutely. Like it is. And it will, I always say too, psychedelics never paint the whole path and give you all the answers in one journey, because that would be incredibly boring if you knew exactly what the rest of your life's path looked like. But it gets to help point you in the what the next couple steps might look like, or where to explore, or at least develop the intuitive signature in your own being, where when you're starting to follow the right path, and which direction. And I say follow your highest excitement. Like, and it's no longer the rational mind that's like calculating, oh, what's going to give me the best return on my investment, or what's going to like be better for this, that, or whatever thing that we used to be concerned about. I mean, if I were concerned about accumulating as much money as possible, I would have stayed in my, very lucrative orthopedic surgery career. But I was no longer interested in that anymore. I'm much more fascinated about serving the expansion of consciousness. And so, and psychedelics absolutely played a role in my ability to develop a path creatively that made sense based on my path in the past, and then where to go moving forward.
Sounds like you're talking about our SPIES model that we talk about in this podcast a lot, our spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social well-being.
Yes.
And how psychedelics can open up those pathways and integrate them. You talk about integration, and, we talk about those 5 dimensions being so intertwined, and the importance of, bringing the spiritual and the physical together. I just see psychedelics playing such a kind of key role in opening that up for people.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that, I use the term 4 coordinates of medicine: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, but it's all pointing to the similar things. And you added the social piece, of course. Our relationships and the way that we relate to anything and everything is a key part of it as well. But we're all, as long as you feel like you're just continuously developing and continuously growing, that's the part that is also, that's what vitality is. If you're not growing, you're slowly dying. trying. And so whenever you feel like you've become a bit too rigid or sclerotic and like you're not learning anymore, well, take a dose of psychedelic. It will shake some things up for you. And then you get to breathe a breath of relief, because I'm like, oh gosh, I got so collapsed in my sort of left hemisphere dominant way of collapsing reality into this flat two-dimensional gray, kind of existence. And so, yeah, you can shake things up and get access to new pathways.
So Oregon is pioneering the legal use of psilocybin. I think it's still got a ways to go, and Colorado is doing things a little bit differently. But how is that process, at least here in Oregon, unfolding for both providers and for patients?
So we are about, things went live about summer of 2023. So we're coming to the end of 2025 now, if I got that right. And yep. So, we've been in, operations now for a couple years. And I would say overall, in terms of like a field or industry perspective, it's been somewhat flat for the growth. It wasn't. There are definitely parts of the regulations, it's governed by the Oregon Health Authority and specifically an arm of the OHA called Oregon Psilocybin Services. And, anytime you attempt to regulate a brand new field, you're going to get some things right and some things not so right. And so there are certain aspects of the regulations that do make it hard to operate. It definitely makes the cost of delivering the service more. And so that's going to necessarily limit, who gets access to these services for now. But my practice is growing and thriving. We figured out I think the hardest part, honestly, has been just awareness. I think still so many people, we take it for granted here in Oregon, I think, about, magic mushrooms. Most people have had, if you grew up in Oregon, you will have had magic mushroom experiences. It's just so much more prevalent on this, this part of the country. But also, people just aren't aware that legal psilocybin services are available. So a lot of the work I do is just increasing awareness. And then additionally, the types of people who are going to invest in this kind of experience and in these services, they seem to, at least the clients that we're attracting, are looking for a clinical level of care. They're not as interested, a certain cohort of people, they're just not as interested in the other ways that you can serve this medicine. So especially if you're brand new to psychedelics, it's very intimidating, and a lot of fear still culturally, and a lot of it is baggage from the drug war, and then government propaganda, and then of course irresponsible use. And so people really appreciate just a very clean, professional way in a way that meets them where they're at, that aligns with their current sense-making frameworks. And so we're actually doing just fine. But I think some other places have struggled. There are service centers that have closed already, but it's overall flat. I'm not nearly as familiar with Colorado's regulations, just because I spend all day keeping track of the Oregon regulations and how they change and stuff like that. But these days, I'm putting a lot more of my focus really into my education work, which, I have my YouTube channel where I help to dispel any misconceptions or myths about psychedelics and psilocybin specifically, and just help people learn from a credible source. And I've really been enjoying that a lot. I think honestly, that is my number one passion, is education. And then now I get to work with a really fantastic team of facilitators. And where they really excel is in the space holding and the preparation and the integration piece of things. Does that answer a question about Oregon?
Yeah, and I really appreciate your educational arms. That what I've learned just by going onto YouTube and watching the shorts and the interviews and the videos and the podcasts and whatnot. And It's interesting in Oregon, and Colorado has taken a slightly different approach. I think Colorado seems to be a little less oriented towards the stricter clinical practice, but they've opened up a little bit more recreational accessibility to the medicines that Oregon doesn't have. And it's interesting that Oregon has gone the path with psilocybin that it has taken, and it's taken a completely opposite path when it came to cannabis. Cannabis doesn't seem that there's as much of a clinical therapeutic arm to it, but you have on every corner you can go and buy, different types of CBDs and cannabis and all kind of things like that. So it's much more accessible recreationally, even though originally it was kind of painted as going to be more, medicinally based. You had to have a prescription for it and everything else. And I think anymore you could pretty much go anywhere and get a prescription for the cannabis. But they haven't really opened up doors for the psilocybin to be a little bit more accessible for, and I hate to use recreational use, and I don't know how to label that. How would you categorize that in terms of, the person who wants to responsibly use psilocybin, but maybe not have to go through the expense or the I wouldn't say a burden, but the having to go to a facility such as your own to be able to have their experience under a very more regimented kind of clinical setting. If that makes any sense.
It does. It does. Yeah. So for people who are like, you know what, I just want to experiment with this on my own. I don't need to go, do the whole thing with like the fully supported level of care. Then I would say, well, one, you have to figure out where you're going to source your medicine. So I always say, like, it's either a personal friend who grows it themselves, or it's a friend of a friend who grows it themselves. Or technically you can buy psilocybin mushroom spores. That part is like a loophole in the regulation. So you're technically allowed to buy spores to grow your own medicine. And then it's just about learning how to cultivate mushrooms without having them get contaminated by mold along the way. So that would be the first step is like good medicine. And also you want to know it's a little trickier because there are some, the potency of the mushrooms are going to vary strain to strain, and it's going to vary batch to batch of the same strain because it's an organic, thing. And so, and then you want to know when your mushrooms were grown, ideally, because psilocybin also degrades over time. And so if you take really old mushrooms that have been sitting in a freezer for like a couple of years, you're going to have a lot of buildup and some disappointment. I hear that a lot from people. They just didn't have much of an experience. And then, so, medicine, safe medicine procured, knowing what dose you're taking, that's a big one too. You don't want to take more than you bargain for. I still recommend doing your work of just understanding what psychedelic effects are, what can come up, like doing all the same preparation that you would otherwise. I think when you're young and using them for recreational purposes, you can get away maybe with like being a bit more careless, and that's the folly of youth, but like you can fall on that. But, the older you get and the more trauma you accumulate, I wouldn't recommend that. And I came into psychedelics with like other responsible psychonauts who helped me in the process. And then also I came into it from very much an intentional angle, ceremonial use angle, especially with ayahuasca. That's very informative for me in terms of, having that respect and reverence and reciprocity with the medicine which informs the experience. But I would also, if you're going to trip, you obviously want to take care to make sure that the setting is safe. Mushrooms are really a beautiful experience that you can have outdoors somewhere in nature is a really wonderful experience to have. And, most of the service centers in Colorado and Oregon are going to be, because of the regulations, in certain commercial areas. Although we do have a service center here in Oregon that is, about 45 minutes west of Portland and on 30 acres. But I would say, yeah, you just want to take care of the setting and then the people that you're with. You want to do it with people that you love and trust deeply, that you don't feel judged by, no matter what happens. And yeah, I think it's perfectly safe to do it in that capacity. Like I said, I don't recommend solo tripping. I recommend doing it with a friend, even if they're just going to be your trip sitter, or if you are going to do it together, at least one person taking a low enough dose so that, like I said, you have someone with 2 feet anchored in this reality. And there's all sorts of like wonderful harm reduction resources out there for tripping on your own, at least until other avenues become available. But yeah, cannabis it's retail. You can just go in and buy it, and we still see though a lot of irresponsible use and harm that's come from that. There's a lot of you know we've seen a lot of, especially in younger people, and psychotic like episodes that are cannabis induced. And so, and I think a lot of that is just being unaware of what dose of THC you're actually taking. And so that's just a very common overdose side effect. And so, yeah, just understand your dosing, start low, go slow, just all those principles.
And at least with the psilocybin, I think it's a little bit more clear roughly what the dosage should be based on the strain of the mushroom that you might be growing or partaking in. But from what I understand with cannabis is the THC levels have grown dramatically and are just like through the roof in terms of the marijuana that's available out there. And I forget what somebody gave me percentages of how much stronger it is now than what would have been available when I was, a teenager or college student.
Yeah, it's over 5 times as potent. I mean, the cultivators have just like the focus has been on THC, and so they've bred the plants to be extreme, 5 times as potent as before. And so, yeah, it's just stuff is a lot stronger than it was. And so you just, again, I think it's all about the dose. It's like, we live in a culture where alcohol is the psychoactive substance of choice. And so it's very much part of our culture that, hey, I don't know how many friends I had where they're, and I'm being cognizant of time here too, but so I'll wrap up with this story, but where you are with your friends and their parents are like, oh, okay, you're 16 or 18, you can have a beer and see what it feels. And there's like, my parents are never like that, but my friends' parents, they were like, okay, yes, you're about to go off to college. You should probably know what alcohol feels like and be responsible. And so you start off like that in a graduated way so that you don't automatically throw back a whole handle of vodka the first time that you drink, you'd be wrecked, of course. So same thing for any other psychoactive substance, psilocybin, cannabis, anything. I think what happens a lot of times is if if you're a kid and these things are demonized, then you can't go to a responsible adult who's going to teach you how to use them. And hopefully our culture will change where we can have some responsible use of these things. Because I think, unlike alcohol, which is ultimately a sedative hypnotic that is actually very destructive, it is actually a neurotoxin and a hepatotoxin over time. It's like, oh, well, actually mushrooms are a much safer option and you can't overdose on them either. So, not that I'm a proponent of kids doing shrooms, but I think my point is made there.
Yeah, I think it still comes down to that intentionality. And it really brings me to the relationship with psychedelics over our ancestral history. You have the indigenous and ancient cultures have used these ceremonially for probably thousands of years. And how do we go about maintaining that, both using cultural humility and respect in the clinical practice, but also from a pharmaceutical standpoint? I mean, I think of what is it, Compass, the company that is working basically to be able to patent their own, synthetic psilocybin. And it would seem to me, especially talking to people that are deeply rooted in the history of psilocybin use, that we can't escape, or we should not escape the ties to the earth and the indigenous history of the drugs. So what are your thoughts on how we have respect for the history of the medicines and still being able to utilize it in a clinical setting?
Yes, this is such a big question, actually. Um, you know, like for so many people, there's this concept of actually ecodelic or ecodelia, which is especially with the earth-based psychedelics, this deep sense of feeling rooted and embedded within the fractally complex web of life that exists here on planet Earth. A lot of people say, oh, I take the mushroom and I plug into the mycelial network. And so it feels as if our consciousness is doing that. And so I don't think we'll ever hopefully lose track of the healing that's available with more indigenous styles of use with especially the earth-based psychedelics. Now, where do synthetic psychedelics play a role in all of this? Well, at some level, mushrooms aside, because mushrooms are actually another reason why I love working with this medicine is that it's incredibly sustainable. I mean, you can grow flushes and flushes of mushrooms in a very small area, and it's regenerative, it's sustainable, all of it. And so there's no concern there with mushrooms. And I think they will always be superior to the synthetic, single molecule, because you have hundreds of alkaloids within the mushroom that all have these synergistic effects and benefits. But there are use cases for synthetic psychedelics, especially when used in a more medical capacity. One, for the other psychedelics that are endangered. And you're not able to cultivate them with the speed and volume that you would need to serve the number of people who need these medicines. Bufo or 5-MeO-DMT would be an example of this. There's a synthetic version of 5-MeO-DMT that Atai Life Sciences is in development, phase 2 clinical trials for treatment-resistant depression. And so I think that is overall a good thing. And anybody who has had experiences with indigenous styles of use of earth-based psychedelics are going to see the value in it, that while still holding space for the applications for the synthetic versions of various psychedelics. I mean, and then there's even talk of psychedelics that don't lead to a psychedelic trip, which is really, they're not really psychedelics at that point. They're more psychoplastogens. But in the case of, say, Alzheimer's patients or various neurodegenerative conditions where someone is maybe not strong enough to withstand a really big psychedelic experience, I think there is potential there too. And we can continue to learn. And it's with our current scientific research models, we have to have reduce it down to one molecule at a time in order to abide by the principles of the scientific method. So that's all helpful, I think, in service of more ceremonial indigenous use. And I like to be optimistic that it can, weave together where, okay, maybe if there's FDA rescheduling of these medicines for use medically, hopefully that will just increase access for use outside of those contexts.
So for listeners and viewers that are curious about exploring psychedelics for healing legally and safely, what are the first steps or precautions that they should consider?
They should, first and foremost, if you're looking to use them legally, check your state laws, and they're legal right now. Psilocybin is legal right now in Oregon and Colorado. New Mexico is next. You want to make sure that you're in a licensed setting and all of those things. You can just check in the state directories. And that's the beauty of the regulated model. A lot of the credentialing and that sort of thing is taken care of for you, so that then you can just focus on the particular provider that resonates most with you.
So, and being one of those providers, how can our viewers and listeners connect with you, find your practice, find your websites, your YouTube, and all those?
Yeah. So my the website of my practice is www.meadowmedicine.org. So Meadow Medicine. And I have a YouTube channel that is just the Tracy Townsend MD YouTube channel, where I share educational information through that channel. I'm on various social media platforms. You can find me just by looking up my name. And I'd love to connect with anyone who really resonated with this episode.
So is there anything we failed to talk about today that you wanted to make sure that the viewers and listeners get to hear? I know I have about 10 more questions that I would have asked you, but I know we've been on for a while.
This world is so expansive and it's so rich. And yeah, we've just barely scratched the surface. And so I would just encourage anyone that if you're curious to just keep following that curiosity. And there's this field is only growing. And so, yeah, just follow your curiosity.
And I think we need advocates too out there. And that's one thing that I'm really trying to step into on this podcast and having more voices to be able to talk about the benefits of psilocybin, because we only have 2 states that have it remotely legal and accessible to people. And we still have 48 other states and some territories that could also follow suit. And I know for a while, Oregon was considering kind of repealing the whole decision as well. And I think that would be a huge mistake. And so if people can do their homework, come to understand, you don't have to do psychedelics, but you can understand how they can benefit people, and you be supportive so that people can get the help that they need.
Yes.
So I'm going to let you go because I know we've been on a lot longer than you probably anticipated, and I could probably keep you here another hour and a half. Thanks for coming on.
I had to run to pick up my son.
Yeah.
I was getting a little nervous. So his school bus is coming, but it was a pleasure, Jeff.
This was, and I love what you're doing. Just keep doing it and keep aging well and keep helping people age well.
Oh, keep doing what you're doing too. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Aging Well podcast. Please like, subscribe, or follow, and share this episode with a friend. And be sure to visit the affiliate links in the description below. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep aging well.